Hello, my dear viewers. Today will be a very interesting story. I recommend watching the video to the end. Put a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and be sure to write comments on what you liked or did not like, and if you have an interesting criminal story from your life. Write your story in the comments and I will make a video and tell your story here on the channel. Okay, I have detained you. I wish you a good mood and viewing. My name is Claire Reynolds, and 3 months ago I moved to the city for a fresh start. After years of living in a small town, I was eager to begin my new life. I found a modest but charming apartment on the 5th floor of an old brick building. It wasn't fancy, but it felt cozy, and I loved the vintage details, the creaky wooden floors, the tall windows, and the intricate molding on the ceilings. The landlord, Mr. Harper, was a kind but peculiar man. As he handed me the keys, he said, "This place has character, but don't let it get too familiar with you." I laughed nervously, thinking he was just joking, but now I'm not so sure. The first night in the apartment was uneventful. I unpacked, cooked a simple dinner, and fell asleep on the couch while watching a movie. But the next evening, as I lay in bed, I heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from the wall behind my headboard. At first, I thought it was the pipes or maybe a neighbor, but the sound didn't follow a pattern. It would stop and start, almost as if someone was tapping deliberately. I got up, pressed my ear to the wall, and held my breath. The tapping stopped. Convinced I was imagining things, I went back to bed. But just as I was drifting off to sleep, the sound started again. Over the next few days, the noises continued. It wasn't just tapping anymore, there were faint whispers, too, so soft I couldn't make out the words. One afternoon, I decided to explore the apartment more thoroughly. There was a small door in the hallway, one I hadn't noticed before. It was painted the same color as the walls and blended in almost perfectly. I tried the handle, but it was locked. Curious, I asked Mr. Harper about it the next time I saw him. "Oh, that door," he said, his smile fading. "It's just a storage closet. Best to leave it alone." His tone left no room for questions, but his unease only fueled my curiosity. A week later, as I was sorting through the mail, I found an envelope that didn't belong to me. It was addressed to someone named Margaret Dawson and dated nearly 20 years ago. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was brief and unsettling. "Margaret, please come back. The apartment isn't the same without you. It misses you." There was no sender's name. My hands trembled as I folded the letter back into the envelope. Who was Margaret Dawson, and why had her mail been left behind for so long? That night, the tapping was louder than ever. Frustrated and sleep-deprived, I got out of bed and stormed into the hallway. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty apartment. To my horror, the small door, the one Mr. Harper said was just a closet, creaked open on its own. Inside was a narrow staircase leading downward into darkness. I stared at the open door, my breath caught in my throat. The staircase beyond was narrow, steep, and shrouded in shadows. A faint, musty smell wafted up, a mixture of damp wood and something metallic. I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam of light barely pierced the darkness below. "Just a closet, huh, Mr. Harper?" I muttered under my breath, summoning what little courage I had. With each step I descended, the air grew colder and the silence pressed in around me. My footfalls creaked against the worn wooden steps, the sound amplified in the confined space. The walls were close on either side, their paint peeling and flaking onto the steps. At the bottom of the staircase, I found myself in a small, windowless room. The walls were lined with shelves, each one crammed with boxes, jars, and what looked like old books. A single light bulb dangled from the ceiling, its pull chain swaying slightly, as if recently disturbed. I tugged the chain, and the bulb flickered to life, casting a dim, yellowish glow over the room. My eyes were drawn to the far wall, where a large, ornate mirror was propped against the brick. Its gilded frame was tarnished, but its surface gleamed unnaturally, as if it had been recently polished. I moved closer, my flashlight trembling in my hand. That's when I noticed something chilling. My reflection in the mirror wasn't moving. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure in the mirror stared back at me, but while I held the flashlight, it didn't. Its arms hung limply at its sides, and its head tilted slightly, as if studying me. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The reflection's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then, with a sudden, jarring movement, it raised one hand and pointed at me. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone. The flashlight beam darted across the room, catching glimpses of the shelves and their unsettling contents. When I dared to look back at the mirror, the reflection was gone. I was on the verge of fleeing back upstairs when something on the shelf nearest the mirror caught my eye. Among the dusty jars and tattered books was a small wooden box, its lid engraved with the same swirling patterns that adorned the mirror's frame. I reached for it hesitantly, half expecting it to burn or shock me. But the wood was smooth and cool to the touch. The lid creaked as I opened it, revealing a stack of old photographs tied together with a faded ribbon. The first photo was of a young woman standing in what looked like my apartment. She had dark hair pinned neatly back and wore a dress that suggested the 1950s. Her smile was small, almost timid. Scribbled on the back of the photo was a name, Margaret Dawson. The next photo showed Margaret again, but this time she wasn't alone. She stood beside a tall, thin man whose face was partially turned away. There was something unsettling about him, the sharpness of his features, the way his eyes seemed to glint even in the monochrome image. The final photo was the most chilling. Margaret was seated on the floor, staring directly at the camera. Her expression was one of sheer terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. I slammed the box shut, my hand shaking. I needed answers, but more than anything, I needed to get out of that room. I turned to head back up the stairs, but stopped in my tracks. A message had appeared on the mirror, written in a dark, dripping substance that hadn't been there moments ago. "You shouldn't have come here." My breath caught, and I bolted up the stairs two at a time, slamming the small door shut behind me. The next morning, I stormed down to Mr. Harper's office. The building manager looked up from his desk, startled by my sudden entrance. "What's going on, Miss Reynolds?" he asked, his tone wary. I tossed the photos onto his desk. "You lied to me," I said. "That room isn't a closet. What is this place? And who is Margaret Dawson?" Mr. Harper's face went pale. He picked up one of the photos, his hands trembling slightly. "Where did you find these?" he asked quietly. "In the room you told me not to open," I snapped. "I want the truth, Mr. Harper. What happened to her?" He sighed heavily, sinking back into his chair. "Margaret lived in your apartment back in the 1950s. She was a kind, quiet woman, but things started to happen after she moved in." "Strange things, like what?" I pressed. He hesitated. "Voices, shadows, objects moving on their own. She told the landlord at the time that she felt like the apartment was alive, and then one day she vanished." "No one ever saw her again." I stared at him, horrified. "And you didn't think to mention this when I moved in?" "I didn't think you'd go digging around," he said defensively. "The room downstairs was sealed off for a reason. It's better if you leave it alone." Mr. Harper's explanation left me with more questions than answers. As I walked back to my apartment, his words echoed in my mind. The room downstairs was sealed off for a reason. When I reached my door, I hesitated before going inside. The apartment felt different now, no longer cozy and charming, but claustrophobic and watchful, like it had been waiting for me to return. That evening, I packed a bag. I didn't care if I lost my security deposit or if I had to live out of a hotel for a few weeks. I just needed to get away. But as I zipped up my suitcase, the faint tapping began again. I froze, my eyes darting to the wall behind my bed. The sound was louder this time, more insistent. I clenched my fists, determined not to let the apartment intimidate me. "You don't control me," I muttered, my voice trembling. But the tapping stopped, replaced by something worse, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "Stay." The single word sent a shiver down my spine. My suitcase fell to the floor as I bolted from the apartment, my heart hammering in my chest. I checked into a dingy motel on the edge of town, desperate to put distance between myself and the apartment. The room smelled faintly of mildew, and the bed creaked with every movement, but I didn't care. It was better than being back in that place. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret's terrified face in the photograph. Who had taken that picture, and why? Unable to rest, I pulled out my phone and started researching. A few hours of digging led me to a local historian who had written about the building's history. The article mentioned that the apartment complex had been built in the 1920s and had changed ownership multiple times. But what caught my attention was a single line buried in the text. The building is rumored to be cursed, with a string of mysterious disappearances over the decades. I knew I had to find this historian. If anyone could shed light on what was happening, it was him. The next morning, I found myself in a cluttered office at the local historical society. The historian, an older man named Dr. Bennett, greeted me warmly but looked puzzled when I mentioned the apartment building. "Not many people ask about that place anymore," he said, adjusting his glasses. "It's a fascinating piece of history, but it has a dark reputation." I showed him the photos I had found in the hidden room. His expression darkened as he studied them. "This is Margaret Dawson," he said. "She was one of the first documented cases of a disappearance in that building." "What happened to her?" I asked, leaning forward in my chair. "No one knows for sure," Dr. Bennett replied, "but there are theories. Some believe the building itself is cursed. Others think Margaret stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to." "Like what?" Dr. Bennett hesitated. "There's a legend," he said carefully. "A story about a mirror that was brought into the building shortly after it was constructed. Supposedly, it belonged to a collector of occult artifacts. The mirror was said to trap the spirits of those who gazed into it for too long." My stomach churned as I thought about the mirror in the hidden room. "Do you know where the mirror is now?" I asked. Dr. Bennett shook his head. "If it's still in the building, it should be destroyed. Nothing good has ever come from it." Despite every instinct telling me not to, I returned to the apartment that evening. I couldn't explain it, but something was pulling me back, like an invisible thread I couldn't cut. When I stepped inside, the air was heavy, almost suffocating. The tapping started again, louder this time, and I could feel the vibrations in the floor beneath my feet. I walked to the small door in the hallway. It was shut tight, but the sounds seemed to be coming from behind it. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I opened the door and descended the stairs once more. The hidden room looked the same as before, but the mirror was no longer leaning against the wall. It was standing upright, its surface glowing faintly in the dim light. My own reflection stared back at me, but this time it wasn't alone. Behind me, in the mirror's reflection, stood a shadowy figure with glowing eyes. I spun around, but the room was empty. My breath came in shallow gasps as I turned back to the mirror. The shadowy figure hadn't moved, it was still there, watching me. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the small space. The figure raised a hand and pointed at the small wooden box on the shelf. My pulse quickened as I realized it wanted me to open it again. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "I'm not playing your game." The room grew colder and the mirror's surface began to ripple like water. The whispers started again, overlapping and growing louder until they were deafening. "Open it." I reached for the box with trembling hands, desperate to make the noise stop. My hands shook as I lifted the wooden box from the shelf. The whispers grew louder, pressing against my ears like an invisible force. I opened the lid slowly, half expecting the room to collapse around me. Inside, beneath the stack of photographs, was something I hadn't noticed before, a small, folded piece of parchment. The edges were yellowed and the ink had faded, but the words were still legible. "To those who find this, the mirror must remain hidden. It binds what cannot be freed. Do not look too long, or it will take you too. Burn this box if you wish to live." My blood ran cold. The whispers stopped suddenly, plunging the room into an eerie silence. I backed away from the mirror, clutching the box to my chest. The figure in the mirror tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. Then, without warning, it lunged forward, pressing its hands against the glass. Cracks spider-webbed across the surface, and the entire room seemed to vibrate. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. Back in my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, my heart racing. The box felt heavy in my lap, its contents a grim reminder of the danger I was in. I grabbed my phone and dialed Dr. Bennett's number. He answered after the second ring. "Karen, what's wrong?" I went back to the room. I said, my voice trembling, "The mirror, it's alive, Dr. Bennett. There's something inside it." There was a long pause before he spoke. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "You need to destroy that box immediately. If the mirror's connection to it is severed, it might weaken whatever is trapped inside." "How do I destroy it?" I asked, clutching the box tighter. "Fire," he replied, "but you must act quickly. The longer you wait, the stronger it will become." I grabbed my coat and the box, determined to get rid of it once and for all. But as I reached for the doorknob, the lights in the apartment flickered and a low rumble echoed through the walls. The tapping started again, louder than ever, and this time it wasn't just coming from one wall, it was everywhere. My phone buzzed in my pocket. When I pulled it out, the screen was black except for a single message: "You can't leave." I dropped the phone, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The door to the hallway slammed shut on its own, and the temperature in the room plummeted. "Leave me alone," I screamed, clutching the box to my chest. The whispers returned, overlapping and frantic. "Burn it, burn it, burn it." I ran to the kitchen, fumbling for matches. My hands were trembling so badly that it took several tries before I managed to light one. I dropped the match into the sink and watched as the flames engulfed the wooden box. As the fire consumed the box, the apartment seemed to come alive. The walls groaned, the floor shook, and the mirror in the hidden room let out a piercing scream that echoed through every corner of the building. The flames flared brighter, casting long, flickering shadows. I covered my ears, collapsing to the floor as the noise grew unbearable. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. When I looked up, the flames had died out and the box was nothing more than ash. The days that followed were eerily calm. The tapping stopped, the whispers disappeared, and the apartment felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. I met with Dr. Bennett one last time to tell him what had happened. He listened carefully, nodding as I recounted the events. "You did the right thing," he said. "The mirror's power has been severed, and whatever was trapped inside can no longer reach you." "But what was it?" I asked. "What was inside the mirror?" Dr. Bennett hesitated. "Some things are better left unanswered," he said finally. "I moved out of the apartment a week later, unable to shake the memories of what I'd experienced. Even now, in my new home, I sometimes catch myself listening for the faint sound of tapping. Because deep down, I can't help but wonder, did I truly destroy it? Or is it still waiting, somewhere in the shadows? Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos. Hello, my dear viewers. Today will be a very interesting story. I recommend watching the video to the end. Put a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and be sure to write comments on what you liked or did not like, and if you have an interesting criminal story from your life. Write your story in the comments and I will make a video and tell your story here on the channel. Okay, I have detained you. I wish you a good mood and viewing. My name is Crifan Fletcher. I'm 42 years old, a widow for 5 years, and a mother to my only son, Ryan. My life had been steady but lonely since my husband passed. Between work and keeping up with Ryan, who's 22 now, I hadn't made much time for myself. Everything changed one summer evening. Ryan had invited a few friends over for a barbecue. It was a small gathering, just a handful of his college buddies, laughing and grilling burgers in the backyard. That's when I met Josh. He was polite, charming, and confident in a way that set him apart from the others. At 24, he was only a couple of years older than Ryan, but something about him felt more mature. We didn't talk much that evening, just exchanged pleasantries. But over the next few weeks, Josh started stopping by more often, even when Ryan wasn't home. "Just to check in," he'd say with a grin. At first, I thought nothing of it. He was Ryan's best friend, and I figured he was just being kind. But soon I began to notice the way he looked at me, the lingering eye contact, the small compliments about my cooking, or the way I carried myself. I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as harmless. But deep down, I knew there was something more. One evening, Ryan went out with friends, leaving me home alone. Not long after he left, there was a knock at the door. It was Josh. "I didn't know you were coming over," I said, surprised. "I was in the area," he replied with a sheepish smile. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." I invited him in, and we ended up chatting over a glass of wine. He told me about his dreams, his struggles, and his admiration for how I'd managed to keep everything together after my husband passed. "You're incredible, Crifan," he said, his voice soft. I should have stopped him, but instead I let the moment linger. By the end of the night, one thing was clear. We were no longer just talking. The guilt hit me the next morning like a freight train. What was I thinking? He was my son's best friend, but Josh was persistent, and before long we were seeing each other regularly, though always in secret. At first, everything felt exciting, almost intoxicating. Josh had a way of making me feel seen, something I hadn't felt in years. But then I started to notice small inconsistencies in his stories. One day, he mentioned a new job at a financial firm downtown. A week later, he slipped up, claiming he was between jobs. When I asked about it, he laughed it off. Just a misunderstanding, he said. Then there were the phone calls. He'd excuse himself to take them, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And sometimes he'd disappear for days without explanation, only to return with vague excuses about family emergencies. I told myself not to overthink it, but the doubt was there, growing like a shadow in the back of my mind. One afternoon, while Josh and I were having lunch at a small cafe on the edge of town, a man approached our table. He was tall, rough-looking, with a scar running down the side of his face. "Josh," the man said, his voice low and menacing. Josh's face went pale. "Not now," he muttered, glancing nervously at me. The man ignored him, leaning closer. "You're late. You know what happens if you don't deliver." Before I could ask what was going on, the man walked away, leaving Josh visibly shaken. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Just someone from my past," he said, forcing a smile. "Nothing for you to worry about." But I couldn't shake the feeling that Josh was hiding something. A few days later, a package arrived at my doorstep addressed to Josh. It was small and heavy, wrapped in plain brown paper. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, finding a stack of cash and a small black notebook filled with strange symbols and names. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pages. When Josh came over later that evening, I confronted him. "What is this?" I demanded, holding up the notebook. His expression hardened. "You shouldn't have opened that, Crifan." "What's going on?" "Josher, who was that man at the cafe? And what are you involved in?" He hesitated before answering. "It's nothing, okay? Just business. I'll handle it," but his tone didn't reassure me. If anything, it made me more afraid. Josh's evasiveness left me with more questions than answers. As the days passed, I couldn't stop thinking about the package. Who was the man at the cafe, and why was Josh hiding stacks of cash and cryptic notes? One evening, while he was over at my house, his phone buzzed repeatedly. He ignored it at first, but the persistent ringing made it impossible for me not to notice. Finally, I asked, "Aren't you going to answer that?" Josh hesitated, his jaw tightening. "It's nothing," he said, shoving the phone into his pocket, but his reaction spoke volumes. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep on the couch, I couldn't resist the urge to look through his phone. I told myself it was for my own safety. When I unlocked the screen, I found a series of texts from someone named JT. "JT, where's the money? JT, you're running out of time. JT, if you don't come through, it'll be her who pays." The implication sent a chill down my spine. Was he putting me in danger? The next morning, I waited for Josh to wake up before confronting him. I held up his phone, the messages from JT displayed on the screen. "What is this? Josher, who is JT, and what does he mean by it'll be her who pays?" Josh's face darkened, his expression a mix of anger and panic. "You had no right to go through my phone," he snapped. "I had every right," I shot back. "You've been lying to me, hiding things, and now someone's threatening me because of you. I deserve to know the truth." Josh sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think," he said. "JT is just someone I owe money to. It's a misunderstanding, and I'm handling it," but his explanation didn't add up. "And the cash, the notebook, the package. That's part of it," he admitted reluctantly. "I've been trying to pay him back." I wanted to believe him, but the fear in his eyes told me there was more to the story. That afternoon, while Josh was out, I decided to investigate further. I took the black notebook from where I'd hidden it and began examining it in detail. The names listed inside were unfamiliar, but the symbols, some kind of code, caught my attention. I snapped photos of the pages and sent them to Emily, my old friend from college who worked in cybersecurity. She called me almost immediately. "Crifan, where did you get this?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "It's Josh's," I said. "Why? What do the symbols mean?" "This isn't just random," Emily said. "It looks like some kind of ledger, maybe for illegal transactions." "Crifan, I think Josh is involved in something serious." My heart sank. I'd been afraid of this, but hearing it confirmed made everything feel even more real. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. A gruff voice spoke on the other end. "Stay out of it, Crifan. If you know what's good for you, you'll forget about Josh and his mess." My breath caught. "Who is this?" I demanded. The line went dead. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. Someone knew I was digging into Josh's affairs, and they wanted me to stop. But how could I? I was already into deep. The pieces began to fall into place when I confronted Emily again with the photos. She managed to trace one of the names in the notebook to a man with a criminal record: money laundering, fraud, and racketeering. "Josh is connected to these people," Emily said. "And Crifan, if they've threatened you, you need to get out now," but leaving wasn't an option. I couldn't abandon my life, and I couldn't let Josh drag me further into this mess. I had to find a way to protect myself and expose the truth. The phone call from the unknown number haunted me for days. Someone knew I was poking around Josh's secrets, and they didn't like it. But I couldn't back down now. I needed to protect myself and find out the full truth before it was too late. I decided to confront Josh directly. If he wouldn't give me answers, I'd force him to. The next time he came over, I waited until we were sitting in the living room, the black notebook resting in my lap. "We need to talk," I said firmly. Josh's expression shifted the moment he saw the notebook. "Crifan, I told you to leave that alone," he said, his voice tense. "You're not in a position to tell me what to do," I shot back. "I know this isn't just about money. Who are these people, and why are they threatening me?" Josh ran a hand through his hair, clearly torn. Finally, he slumped back against the couch. "Fine," he said. "You want the truth. Here it is. I owe these people a lot, more than I can pay back. They're not the kind of people you mess with, Crifan, and now you've put yourself in their crosshairs." "I put myself in their crosshairs," I repeated, my voice rising. "You're the one who dragged me into this. Why didn't you just tell me from the start?" "Because I didn't want you to get hurt," he shouted back, "but now it's too late. They think you're involved because you've been asking questions." I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. I'd made myself a target, and now there was no way out but forward. Josh insisted we needed to act quickly. The people he owed, led by someone he only referred to as JT, weren't known for their patience. "If we can get them their money, they'll leave us alone," he said. "And how do you plan to do that?" I asked, my skepticism clear. "There's a job," he admitted reluctantly. "Something they've been pressuring me to do. If I pull it off, it clears my debt." "A job," I repeated, my stomach turning. "What kind of job?" Josh looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's the only way out," but it did matter. I could tell he was on the verge of making a dangerous decision, and I wasn't going to let him drag me further into his mess. While Josh focused on his mysterious job, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I needed leverage, something I could use to protect myself if things went south. Emily came through for me again, managing to decrypt part of the black notebook. The names and symbols she uncovered were tied to a network of illegal transactions, including money laundering and extortion. And at the center of it all was J.T. Crifan. This isn't just a small-time operation, Emily warned. These people are dangerous. You need to be careful. Her words only made me more determined. If Josh wasn't going to tell me the whole truth, I'd find it myself. Josh's job was scheduled for the following night. He refused to tell me what it was, but his behavior grew increasingly erratic as the time approached. Stay home, he warned me before leaving. And don't answer the door for anyone. As soon as he was gone, I followed him. I'd attached a GPS tracker to his car earlier that day, something I'd never imagined myself doing before this nightmare began. The tracker led me to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I parked a safe distance away and crept closer, hiding behind a stack of shipping containers. Inside, I could see Josh talking to a group of men, their voices muffled but their body language tense. One of them stepped forward, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, J.T. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the argument grew heated. Then J.T. shoved a duffel bag into Josh's hands and gestured toward a black van parked nearby. Whatever was happening, it was clear Josh was in over his head. Hidden behind the shipping containers, I strained to hear what was happening. My pulse thundered in my ears as I watched Josh reluctantly take the duffel bag from J.T. His shoulders were slumped, his posture defeated, but he didn't protest. He looked like a man with no options left. J.T. pointed to the black van, barking out instructions I couldn't make out. Josh climbed into the driver's seat while two other men got in the back. The van's engine roared to life, and it sped off, leaving me trembling in the cold night air. I didn't know what was in the bag or what Josh was about to do, but I knew I couldn't just stand by. I ran back to my car and began following the van at a safe distance. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, every muscle in my body tense. The van weaved through the city until it stopped outside a high-end jewelry store. My stomach dropped as I watched Josh and the other men get out, their faces obscured by masks. One of them carried the duffel bag. This wasn't just a job, it was a robbery. I panicked. My first instinct was to call the police, but what would that mean for Josh? He'd made terrible choices, but I didn't want him to get hurt. At the same time, I couldn't let this happen. I parked a block away and grabbed my phone, hesitating before dialing. As I debated, the sound of shattering glass reached me. The men were inside. My heart pounded as I realized I had no time left. Instead of calling the police, I decided to confront Josh. I crept closer to the store, staying hidden in the shadows. When I reached the entrance, I saw the men inside, sweeping valuables into the duffel bag. Josh's mask was pulled down around his neck, his face pale and anxious. I banged on the glass. "Josh," I hissed. His head snapped toward me, his eyes widening in shock. He ran to the door, cracking it open just enough to whisper, "Crifan, what the hell are you doing here?" He demanded, "Stopping you from ruining your life." I whispered back fiercely, "This isn't the answer, Josh. You don't have to do this. You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "If I don't, they'll kill me, and they'll come after you too." Before I could respond, one of the other men shouted, "Who's at the door?" Josh slammed it shut, motioning for me to leave. But I couldn't. I stayed rooted to the spot, determined to find another way. The robbery escalated quickly. The men loaded the bag with expensive watches and jewelry, their movements frantic. I realized I needed to act fast. I spotted a security panel near the side of the building, and an idea formed. I ran to it, pulling out my phone to take photos of the panel and the license plate of the van parked nearby. If I couldn't stop them now, I could at least gather evidence to use later. As I worked, the men exited the store, the duffel bag now bulging. Josh's eyes met mine briefly as he climbed into the van, but he said nothing. The van roared off into the night, leaving me standing in the cold, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The next morning, the robbery was all over the news. Security cameras had captured footage of the masked men, but Josh's face had been partially visible when he'd pulled his mask down. The authorities were already searching for him. I called Emily, my voice shaking as I told her everything. I don't know what to do, I admitted. If I go to the police, he could go to jail. But if I stay silent, these people might come after me. Emily's voice was firm. You need to protect yourself, Crifan. If Josh is involved with people like JT, this won't end until they're stopped. I knew she was right, but the thought of turning Josh in made my stomach churn. He'd made terrible mistakes, but I couldn't help remembering the person he'd been before all of this. Could I really betray him? That evening, I received a call from Josh. His voice was desperate. Crifan, I need your help, he said. They're coming for me. I don't know what to do. I hesitated. Where are you? He gave me an address, a rundown motel on the edge of town. Against my better judgment, I went to meet him, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. When I arrived, Josh looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His face was pale, his hands shaking. They know I messed up, he said. JT wants blood. If I don't pay him back, he'll kill me. Then we go to the police, I said firmly. It's the only way. I can't, Josh said, his voice breaking. You don't understand what they'll do. And what about what they'll do to me? I countered. You dragged me into this, Josh. I deserve to be safe. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, I saw real remorse in his eyes. Okay, he said quietly. Let's go. We went to the police station together. Josh confessed everything: the debt, the robbery, the threats from JT. In exchange for his cooperation, the authorities agreed to protect him and investigate JT's operation. It wasn't an easy process. Josh was sentenced to prison time, but his testimony helped bring down JT and his network, ending the cycle of crime. As for me, I moved on, though the scars of what happened lingered. I learned the hard way that love can blind you to the truth, but it also taught me the importance of standing up for myself. In the end, I wasn't just a victim, I was a survivor. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos. Hello my dear viewers. Today will be a very interesting story. I recommend watching the video to the end. Put a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and be sure to write comments on what you liked or did not like, and if you have an interesting criminal story from your life. Write your story in the comments and I will make a video and tell your story here on the channel. Okay, I have detained you. I wish you a good mood and viewing. My name is Linda Carter, and a month ago my life turned upside down. I had always thought of our family as unshakable. Sure, we had our struggles, who doesn't? But we'd faced them together. At least, that's what I believed. It was a quiet Thursday evening when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was cold and formal. Mrs. Carter, this is Officer Bradley. We need you to come down to the station to discuss an incident involving your son. I froze. My son? Tyler, what happened? I think it's better if we talk in person, he said. When I arrived at the station, my heart was pounding. Tyler sat in a small room, his head bowed, his expression unreadable. Beside him was my husband, Richard. His arm was in a sling, and a deep bruise marred his cheek. "What is going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Richard looked at me with a mixture of anger and defiance. "Your son attacked me, Linda. He needs to learn that there are consequences for his actions." Tyler looked up, his jaw clenched. "I didn't do it for no reason," he said quietly. After the officers stepped out, I sat down beside Tyler, my heart breaking as I saw the pain in his eyes. "Tyler, what happened? Why would you do this?" He hesitated before answering, his voice low. "Mom, he was cheating on you. I caught him with someone else." I stared at him, stunned. "What do you mean? How do you know that?" "I saw them," he said. "I was coming home from a friend's house and saw Dad at a cafe. He wasn't alone. He was holding hands with another woman, and they left together." I felt the room spinning, my mind struggling to process his words. Richard had always been charming, but I never thought he'd betray me like this. "And you?" confronted him. I asked. Tyler nodded. "I couldn't just let it go, Mom. He's been lying to you, and I couldn't stand it any more." When I walked out of the room to speak with Richard, he immediately launched into a tirade. "Your son is out of control, Linda. He attacked me in my own home like some kind of maniac." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Richard, Tyler says he saw you with another woman. Is it true?" His face turned red, and he avoided my gaze. "That has nothing to do with this," he snapped. "The fact is, he put his hands on me, and he needs to face the consequences. You're really going to press charges against your own son?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't have a choice," he said. "He crossed a line, Linda. You know that night, after Tyler was released on bail, I knew we needed help. I called my friend, Maria, who was a paralegal and knew the ins and outs of the legal system." "Linda, this is a tricky situation," Maria said. "Assault charges can be serious, even in family cases. But if you can prove there were mitigating circumstances, like provocation, it could work in Tyler's favor." "Provocation?" I asked. "If Tyler acted in a moment of heightened emotion, especially if he believed he was defending you in some way, the court might consider it," she explained. Her words gave me a glimmer of hope. "What do we need to do?" "You'll need to gather evidence," Maria said. "Anything that supports Tyler's claim about Richard's infidelity and why he acted the way he did." The next morning, I started going through Richard's belongings, searching for anything that might confirm Tyler's story. It felt wrong to invade his privacy, but I had no choice. In his briefcase, I found receipts for expensive dinners at places we'd never gone to together. There were texts on his phone from a number saved as Jay, filled with flirty messages and plans to meet. I took photos of everything, my hands trembling as I pieced together the evidence. It hurt deeply to see proof of Richard's betrayal, but my priority now was protecting Tyler. I sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at the pile of receipts and messages I'd uncovered from Richard's briefcase. The air felt heavier than ever, as though the house itself was reacting to the secrets it now held. Tyler was in his room, silent. He hadn't said much since we got home from the police station, but I knew the weight of what happened was crushing him. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him it would all be okay, but I didn't even know if that was true. I picked up one of the receipts, a fancy steakhouse downtown, dated 3 weeks ago. I remembered that night clearly. Richard had told me he was working late. The memory stung, but I forced myself to focus. Maria's advice echoed in my head: gather evidence. I needed to build a case to show the court why Tyler wasn't to blame. If Richard wanted to press charges, I would make sure the truth came out. The next morning, I knocked on Tyler's bedroom door. When he didn't answer, I slowly opened it to find him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Can I come in?" I asked gently. He nodded, and I sat beside him. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then I reached out and took his hand. "Tyler, I need you to tell me everything," I said. "I know this is hard, but we need to get through it together." "What exactly happened that night?" He hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt him, Mom. I swear. I saw red." He explained how he'd confronted Richard after catching him at the cafe with another woman. I told him I knew what he was doing, and he just laughed. He said it wasn't my business and that I didn't understand how relationships worked. My stomach twisted as I listened. "And then what?" "He pushed me," Tyler said, his voice breaking. "He told me to stay out of it, but I couldn't. I shoved him back and he fell. I didn't hit him, Mom. I didn't punch him or anything. I hugged him tightly, my heart aching for him. "We'll figure this out," I promised. Maria agreed to meet us that afternoon at her office. I brought all the evidence I'd found, photos of the texts, the receipts, everything. Tyler sat beside me, looking nervous but determined. Maria spread the papers out on her desk, studying them carefully. "This is good," she said. "It shows a clear pattern of infidelity. But we need more than just proof that Richard was cheating. We need to show that Tyler's actions were a result of provocation, not malice." "What do you suggest?" I asked. "We'll need statements," Maria replied. "Anyone who can testify to Tyler's character or who saw the incident that night. And we need to frame this as a response to a deeply emotional situation, not a premeditated act." Tyler looked at me, his eyes wide. "You mean I'll have to go to court?" Maria nodded. "If Richard doesn't drop the charges, yes. But if we present this evidence effectively, we can argue for leniency. The court will see you as a young man who acted impulsively, not as a criminal." That evening, I called Richard. I didn't want to speak to him, but I needed to try one last time to resolve this without dragging Tyler through the legal system. He answered on the second ring, his tone cold. "What do you want, Linda?" "I want to talk about Tyler," I said. "Richard, this doesn't have to go to court. He's your son. We can handle this as a family." Richard scoffed. "Handle it, Linda." He attacked me. "He needs to learn that actions have consequences." "You're the one who's been lying to us," I snapped, my anger bubbling over. "You're the one who's been cheating and sneaking around." Tyler reacted because he saw you for what you are, a liar. There was a long pause on the other end. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was calm but cutting. "This isn't about me, Linda. It's about Tyler, and I'm not dropping the charges." I hung up, my hands shaking. The next day, I got an unexpected call from one of Tyler's friends, Jason. "Mrs. Carter, I heard what happened," he said. "I just wanted you to know I was there that night." I saw everything. My heart skipped a beat. "Jason, you saw the argument between Tyler and Richard?" "Yes," he said. "I was waiting for Tyler outside, and I saw him and Mr. Carter arguing through the window. Mr. Carter was yelling at Tyler, and he pushed him first. Tyler didn't hit him, he just shoved him back." "Would you be willing to tell the court that?" I asked. There was a pause, and then Jason said, "If it helps Tyler, yes." "I'll do it." I hung up, feeling a renewed sense of hope. With Jason's testimony and the evidence Maria had compiled, we had a fighting chance. Jason's willingness to testify was a breakthrough, but Maria stressed that we needed more to solidify Tyler's defense. Over the next few days, she worked tirelessly, piecing together a narrative that would paint a clear picture of what happened that night. We need to show the court that Tyler acted impulsively in a moment of emotional distress, Maria explained during one of our meetings. It's not about excusing his actions, it's about providing context. I spent hours combing through old photos and letters, compiling anything that could attest to Tyler's character. He wasn't a violent person, far from it. He'd always been the kid who helped his classmates, who volunteered at food drives, who stayed late to help clean up after soccer games. Maria also reached out to a counselor who had worked with families in similar situations. She believed their testimony about the emotional toll of infidelity and betrayal could be invaluable. "Trust me, Linda," Maria said, her voice steady. "We're building a strong case. Now we just need to prepare Tyler for what's coming." Tyler's confidence had been shaky ever since the incident, but Maria insisted on preparing him thoroughly for his day in court. "You'll need to stay calm," she told him during a mock cross-examination. "The prosecutor will try to rattle you, but you can't let them see that. Just stick to the truth." "I'll try," Tyler said, his voice quiet. "Don't try to," Maria said firmly. "You're a good person, Tyler, and the court needs to see that. Speak from the heart. Be honest about what you felt that night and why you acted the way you did." We practiced for hours, going over potential questions and responses. Tyler's nerves were evident, but by the end of the session, I saw a spark of determination in his eyes. The court date arrived faster than I expected. Walking into the courthouse that morning, my stomach felt like it was tied in knots. Tyler walked beside me, his shoulders squared but his face pale. Maria led the way, her briefcase swinging purposefully at her side. Richard sat on the other side of the courtroom, looking polished and smug in his suit. Seeing him like that made my anger bubble up all over again. How could he do this to his own son? The prosecutor wasted no time trying to discredit Tyler. "You claim you were provoked, but isn't it true that you physically pushed your father out of anger?" she asked. Tyler took a deep breath. "I did push him, but I didn't do it out of malice. I was upset because I saw him cheating on my mom. I confronted him, and he pushed me first. I reacted without thinking." The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. "So you admit to losing control?" "Yes," Tyler said, his voice steady. "But I never intended to hurt him." Jason was the next to take the stand. As he recounted what he saw that night, the courtroom was silent. "I was outside the house, waiting for Tyler," Jason said. "I saw Mr. Carter and Tyler through the window. They were arguing. Mr. Carter was yelling at him, and then he pushed Tyler. Tyler pushed back, but it wasn't a fight. It was more like a reflex." The prosecutor tried to poke holes in Jason's story, but he remained calm and consistent. By the time he stepped down, I could see a shift in the courtroom. People were starting to see Tyler not as an aggressor, but as a young man caught in an emotional storm. Maria called the counselor to the stand next. They spoke about the psychological impact of infidelity on families, especially when children feel compelled to defend a parent. "Infidelity can create deep emotional wounds," the counselor explained. "When a child witnesses betrayal, it can trigger feelings of anger, confusion, and even protectiveness. In cases like this, actions that might seem aggressive are often impulsive responses to intense emotional stress." Their testimony was powerful, and I could see some members of the jury nodding along. Maria had done an incredible job framing Tyler's actions in the broader context of what our family had endured. As the counselor stepped down, Maria turned to Tyler. "This is your chance," she said softly. "The jury needs to hear your side from your heart. Be honest, and don't let their questions shake you." Tyler nodded, his hands gripping the edge of the table as he stood. He adjusted his tie, a tie he rarely wore, one I'd helped him pick out that morning. He walked to the stand slowly, his shoulders stiff but his chin raised. The courtroom was silent as Tyler was sworn in. Maria approached him first, her voice calm and encouraging. "Tyler," she began, "can you explain to the court how you were feeling that night?" He hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting briefly to me before he spoke. "I was angry," he admitted, "angry, confused, and hurt. I saw my dad with another woman that night, and it broke me. I couldn't believe he'd do something like that to my mom." Maria nodded, her tone steady. "When you confronted your father, how did he respond?" Tyler swallowed hard. He laughed at me, told me I didn't understand how relationships worked. When I pushed him on it, when I asked how he could betray her, he shoved me. It wasn't hard, but it felt like he was telling me to back off, like none of it mattered. And I just reacted. Maria's gaze softened. "Did you mean to hurt him?" "No," Tyler said firmly. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted him to understand how much he'd hurt us, but I never wanted him to get hurt physically." The prosecutor's heels clicked sharply against the tile floor as she approached Tyler. Her expression was sharp, her eyes narrowing as she prepared to dissect his testimony. "Mr. Carter," she began, "you claim you acted out of emotional distress. But isn't it true that you followed your father into the house, escalating the argument?" Tyler shifted slightly in his seat. "I didn't follow him to escalate anything. I wanted to talk to him, to understand why he did what he did." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "And yet you admit to pushing him. Isn't it true that you acted out of anger?" "I was angry," Tyler admitted, his voice steady, "but I didn't plan to hurt him. It wasn't about anger, it was about everything building up inside me. I didn't know how to handle it." "Didn't know how to handle it," the prosecutor repeated, her tone skeptical. "So you resorted to violence." "It wasn't violence," Tyler said, his voice rising slightly. "It was a split-second reaction. I didn't stop to think, it just happened." His words hung in the air, and for a moment even the prosecutor seemed to pause. Tyler's honesty was raw, and it was clear he wasn't trying to dodge responsibility. The next day, Maria told me I'd have the opportunity to make a statement as part of Tyler's defense. I spent the entire night thinking about what to say, writing and rewriting my words until they felt right. When I stepped onto the stand, my hands trembled slightly, but I took a deep breath and focused on the jury. "Tyler is my son," I began, my voice steady despite the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. "He's not perfect, no one is, but he's a good person. He's kind, thoughtful, and fiercely loyal to the people he loves." I paused, glancing at Richard, who was sitting stiffly at the prosecution's table. When Tyler saw his father's betrayal, it shattered him. Our family has always been built on trust, and in that moment, he felt like that foundation had crumbled. He acted impulsively, yes, but not out of malice. He acted because he cared, because he believed in standing up for what's right. The room was silent, every pair of eyes fixed on me. I looked directly at the jury, willing them to see Tyler the way I did. My son isn't a criminal. He's a young man who made a mistake in a moment of pain. I hope you can see that, too. After days of tense arguments and testimony, the jury finally deliberated. The courtroom was packed as the foreperson stood, holding the small piece of paper that would determine Tyler's future. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the judge asking for the verdict. We find the defendant, Tyler Carter, not guilty of assault, the foreperson said, but guilty of misdemeanor disorderly conduct. A wave of relief washed over me. Disorderly conduct was a minor charge. It wouldn't destroy Tyler's future. He would have to pay a fine and complete community service, but he wouldn't face jail time. Tyler looked at me from the defendant's table, his eyes wide with disbelief. I gave him a small nod, tears streaming down my face. In the weeks that followed, Tyler worked tirelessly to complete his community service. He volunteered at a local shelter, helping families in crisis. It was hard work, but I could see how much it meant to him to give back and make amends. As for Richard, he moved out of the house shortly after the trial. He and I spoke only once more, a brief conversation about finalizing the divorce. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a sense of closure. Tyler and I began to rebuild our lives piece by piece. There were still hard days, moments when the memories of the trial resurfaced. But through it all, we found strength in each other. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, Tyler turned to me and said, "I'm sorry for everything. Mom, I wish I'd handled things differently." I took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We can't change the past," I said, "but we can learn from it. And we're stronger now because of it. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but it was ours." And for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos.